Okay, so for those of you who missed the last one, we are talking about power in this series and the use and abuse thereof. Today we'll be concentrating on love and how it pertains to power and its use and abuse. We kind of touched on it a little bit last time because I think undeniably love is the antidote to power. We talked last time about how the etymology of love gets into freedom, right? And so freedom is the opposite of corruption and power that we try to put over other people. However, because love has that influence, it's used by a lot of people to try to get power, right? So even though love is the antidote, every poison is a cure, and every cure is also a poison. So we'll be talking a little bit about some of love's poisonous effects in terms of power and how that goes, but also how easy it is to just flip it around. Have you guys been fighting a lot with people you love this week?
Oh yeah.
Venus is in Aries, god of war, so that's been going down a lot. I know a lot of people I've talked to are like, God, it's just been like argument after argument. So Venus, as the planet of love, has been in Aries, which is like total fighty town. She kind of riles everybody up, you know? And so I thought it was perfect to be giving this lecture on love and power when Venus is in fact in Aries. Worked out rather nicely that way. And of course the other thing that's happening is Valentine's Day is coming up. And we're going to talk about Valentine's Day and kind of its deeper esoteric meaning as well. For all of those that are a little sourpussy on Valentine's Day, you'll find out that it has a deep history of sourpussy. So, we'll get into that later, as I know you all want to do. Influence, as I've mentioned in a few other lectures, is actually the #1 mechanism for how magic works, right? If you have influence over something, you can make it do something, right? The magician is the one that through his influence makes it rain, you know, stops the stars in the sky, does all kinds of crazy stuff, and he does it through influence. And as I've mentioned, that's usually done through harmony, sympathy, and love. So the power of love through influence is no small matter, right? I always like to use this example. Look at how much influence through love Justin Bieber has. These young women are willing to murder Selena Gomez. That is like so black magic sorcery, influence of love and power, you know. That's like such a good example. People are like, oh, you know, what, how can you influence someone through power of love? Justin Bieber, okay? And he doesn't even like have to talk to them. He just whispers his songs into their ear through the radio, right? So I like to use him because that is the most modern example we have when throughout history, of course, the most notorious job of witches is influence over love, right? That was what they would get paid for. A lot of people will still pay witches to influence love. I've had people try to pay me to influence love. And then they get an earful. But it happens a lot. There was a gal who came into my work where I work, and she said that her man was with another woman. And so she put her menstrual blood in his soup in order to try to influence him to, you know, come back to her and be bound to her. But it didn't quite work. You know, it worked for a little while, and then they were all together again, but then he still went back to the other woman. So she was like, I want to try something a little more intense. Right? More intense than putting your blood in a soup? I don't know. I don't know what else I got for like more intense than that. But there is a litany of increasing intensities that witches can and have performed in order to influence love and those kind of things. And people forget people will affiliate the witch with being able to hire, to like get a husband, but there's a couple other things that witches would do in terms of love as well. And I have this really good quote. Come on up. Hey, how's it going? I have this really good quote from this book, which is called Witches, Sirens, and Soothsayers. I love that word, soothsayer. And this was from the 17th century, from a medical textbook. And he said that cunning women, which is another word for witch, the cunning women, they were wise women or cunning, took upon them 3 things. The first was to make match and to join the husband and the wife. The second was to be present at the delivery of women. The third was to resolve or tell women whether they were pregnant with child or not. So witches not only did this thing of matchmaking where they would influence love, but they also dealt with the consequences of love, if you will, call it a consequence, which included pregnancy, right? The witch was also the midwife, which would do the delivering. Back in the day, they didn't have like a hospital where you could go and give birth. You had to go see the witches. You had to go to the midwives, to the herbalists. And you know what else they would also do, which is something that a lot of people don't know? They would do abortions. They would perform herbal abortions. That was one of their main active duties that a lot of the women shaman would do. And that's something that has gone like very taboo, that ladies don't know that there are actually a lot of herbs you can take that will induce an abortion. Vitamin C, in fact, is an herbal abortive. However, I always caution people, it's not exactly safe to give yourself an abortion, even with herbs, so you don't want to, just because I say that, be like, oh, I can just take a vitamin C, it's totally cool. That's not what I want that to do at all. But it's important that women understand that performing that is something that has been happening actually since primitive caveman type times, because people have known about these plants since forever. But nobody talks about them anymore, and women think that their only option is, of course, to go to a hospital, which since they're defunding Planned Parenthood, possibly you might not be able to do that anymore. So we might see a little rise in witches happening as they take away some of those rights that we have as ladies to be able to have a safe place to do that. But so, if they're also performing these tasks, this was something that became punishable, right? This was something that became not allowed for witches and women to do because why? Well, the men took it over. And not the men are terrible, but that is kind of how it went down. And in fact, midwifery is illegal in some states. You guys know this? Kentucky. Can't be midwife. I know I'm so harsh on Kentucky all the time. You can't be midwife in Kentucky. It's against the law. That's having a baby with a lady that knows about having babies. You can't do it. So this whole thing with the witch being able to influence love got to such epic proportions that they demonized it so thoroughly that everyone now only really knows about the ability for the witch to cast the love spell and influence someone else's behavior. And somehow along the lines, all those other things that are caught up in love, because what happens when you love someone erotically? Well, you have sex, usually, right? So then there's all this stuff that happens after you have sex. It's true. And they would also deal with STDs. STDs are something that have been around for a very long time. Before hospitals, back when they would go see the witches for abortions, the witch would also treat for STDs. You guys know, like, that those go way back into, like, Greek and Roman history, and for some reason people think it just happened in, like, the Vietnam War or something. I don't know. But these kind of things affiliated with sex and love have been pretty much going on since sex and love have been going on, right? So somehow it got eradicated in our minds that there was some way to, like, deal with it. But in fact, it was the witches that were the ones that would deal with all of those accoutrements that went along with it. So, along those lines, it was very interesting as I was doing my research into this, because the other thing that witches would do as a service to take money for was prostitution, right? Not only were they able to find a match, but there's all these stories which go into, like, some of the even Egyptian literature of the midwife, of the abortionist, of the love healer, who would also perform sex for money as well, right? So they were kind of a little potpourri of everything love affiliated. And I was looking up the etymology of the word whore. And, you know, the whore is really something very interesting that, of course, is very taboo. But if you think about the whore and love, I mean, what does a whore do? She pretty much loves everybody, right? That's like her job, is to kind of love everybody. And, you know, they get paid for just loving people that can't get love anywhere else. So the whore is a little bit like a martyr in a lot of ways. And we're going to be getting into the martyr idea too. So even though everybody thinks of a whore in a derisive sense, they're actually providing a very important service, which is pertaining to love that people can't get in other places. And I know people say, well, sex isn't love, and there's no connection between the two. But I don't know, I could argue with you for a little while about that. But so, if we look into where the word whore comes from, in Germanic, it actually comes from scortum, which is not scrotum. I know they sound a lot alike, it's very confusing. Scortum, which means skin hide. And that skin hide came from she-wolf. So whore comes from she-wolf. And I was like, what? What is that about? And then I start looking up, well, what is the whore she-wolf thing? Here's what I found. It comes from this festival called Lupercalia. Lupercalia is the pagan festival that's February 13th to 15th. Oh my God, it's Valentine's Day. Lupercalia is the celebration of the she-wolf, and it was none other than the she-wolf that raised Romulus and Remus. You guys know that story? No. Let me Google that for you. So Romulus and Remus were these two human babies that were raised by a she-wolf. And feral children's stories are some of my really all-time favorite ones. There was a while, do you guys know, like, this is in mythology, and there's some speculation. Maybe it was made up, maybe it wasn't, they don't know, although there is some evidence that Romulus and Remus actually existed. But there was a couple years ago where I was on an internet, you know, kind of hole, and I was looking at all these feral children's stories, and there was this Russian feral child that they found. You guys remember this kid? And they got him into custody, and they had these pictures of, like, his hands and feet, and his nails were, like, all long, his toenails were, like, so gnarly, and his face was like, ah! And they had him, and he was captured, and he escaped out of the captivity. They were, like, trying to study him, and, like, you know, they had given him these, like, clothes, but he kept, like, taking off his clothes, and they couldn't keep the clothes on him, and he took all his clothes off, and he ran off into the woods and escaped. But he'd been raised by wolves. And there's all kinds of these stories where there actually are human babies that are raised by other animals. I mean, that's like the Jungle Book too, you know, has that whole story, and everyone thinks it's a story. This is actually something that they have evidence of that happens. That's crazy. Like, from the time they're babies, like Romulus and Remus, the most famous statue is they're sucking on the teat of the wolf, right? And the wolf just totally goes ahead and raises them like they're regular, right? That's like crazy love style. A wolf would just eat a baby. They don't care. How many stories in Europe are there of wolves eating babies? Like so many. What would make a wolf just not eat those babies? You know, but like them. And then be like, okay, cool, you want to eat? Like, go ahead. You know? It's very interesting. So this whole festival of the Lupercalia, they would, everyone would get naked, of course, pagan, and then they would run around in the village and they would slap all the women's bellies. And it was like a good sign to become fertile and be able to get pregnant. Everyone would just run around slapping each other on the belly, like high five, but like belly high five. To try and like, I guess like activate, like, let's get a baby in there, you know? So the whole thing was a fertility rite. It was a fertility festival based around this lady wolf that raised some human babies. And that's where we get the word whore. So, whore did what? Whore, actually, the she-wolf, actually sacrificed her own body in order to save the lives of these children. Oh, now it gets interesting, right? Because all of a sudden, now it's a sacrificial act and not something that is evil or derisive, but in fact, she gave her whole body so that these infants could live, right? Willingly. Willing, sacrificial act of the flesh, right? Now, I know certainly there's plenty of prostitutes you could argue, is it willing, you know, because they get forced by circumstance. But I just like that idea of the whore as the one who is sacrificing her body to give love to other people. I think it's very interesting. And a lot of prostitutes do it also so they can have money for their children, right? She-wolf style. So that's very important to remember as well. But so, as we know, there are many of the Christian holidays that are simply appropriated from the pagans, you know, because they would pick those days on purpose so that they could eradicate the pagan history. So they picked the Ides of February, the 13th to the 15th, and they put a holiday upon it, which of course is St. Valentine's Day. And do you guys know anything about St. Valentine? A little bit? No? Nobody goes to Sunday school and magic school, huh? That's good. So St. Valentine wasn't actually just one person. There was actually a whole bunch of St. Valentines. There was like a few. And Valentine was actually an area. And that's why there were certain martyrs that would die that were from that area, and they became known as St. Valentine. But there was actually no eroticism in any of the St. Valentines. There was no kind of like love or romance. Many of them were beheaded or killed in otherwise unsavory manners. And there was not really any kind of devotional love between a man and a woman, or man and man, or woman and woman that was affiliated with any of the St. Valentines at all. So you can see, first of all, that that love aspect of it actually comes from the pagan holiday, right? Of the fertility ritual. So what then, why St. Valentine, you know, why would they stick it there? Well, it's the martyr aspect of the attribute that I think would be applicable to love. And the word martyr actually means witness or to see, to look. It also relates to memory and remember, right? And what do you guys think of when you think of the word martyr, besides your mom? Everybody thinks of Jesus, usually, right? Jesus Christ is known in history as the first martyr, right? And then all of the Christians that died, they were witnesses to Jesus, and they said, like, I believe in Jesus Christ, and then they were, like, killed by the Romans because they were pagans, right? So that's pretty much what happened. You guys know, like, early Christianity, how they would feed the Christians to the lions? And that's like where the martyrdom comes from. So the reason they were martyrs was because they were willing to die without fighting. The Christian martyrs never fought. They didn't have a sword and were like, no, Jesus! You know, that came later with the, you know, the Spaniards. They took their swords and they were like, no, Jesus! But, I know, it's so weird, right? But the martyrs and the saints actually were, for the most part, you know, maybe there's a couple stinkers in there, but were non-violent. They were non-violent, and they would advocate their choice of religion and of witnessing Jesus Christ in a manner that was purely devotional, right? Without fighting. And so if we think about, like, the Saint Valentines, you know, you can be like, oh, well, you know, they were Christians, they were just devoted to Jesus, but who cares? But no, I mean, these were men who believed in the power of Jesus Christ so much that they willingly died without even fighting. They just said, you know what? I just love Jesus, so go ahead and kill me. Just do it. Go ahead. I don't care. That's pretty heavy duty, right? How many of you would do that for your boyfriend? Or your girlfriend? Yeah. So, I mean, that becomes a pretty heavy thing to think about, this whole idea of the martyr and the influence of love. And it kind of goes back to, of course, Justin Bieber. Because if you think about Justin Bieber, how many of those girls do you think would be willing to just die for Justin Bieber? There might be a few. They're willing to kill for Justin Bieber. So you guys know, like, Selena Gomez got attacked so gnarly. Do you see those pictures of her face? Like, they are so under the influence of love for Justin Bieber that they'll just, like, they'll do anything. They don't care. They're crazy. Right? And that when you think about that power of the martyr, of the influence of love, of devotion, how far that can go, when you'll just, like, sit down and die, that is a powerful, influential force, right? Now you guys see why witches started getting a little bit of flack, right? They're the ones in control of the love. Love, Justin Bieber style, can kill a government, can kill a nation, can assassinate a president, right? You get that type of devotional love that a witch sets in motion, you are in trouble. Look at Helen of Troy. Oh. Now the influential power of love is affecting not only one nation, but like countries full of hundreds of thousands of people because of one pretty chick. That's crazy, right? That's not even like religious love. That's just sexual love, right? For like hundreds of thousands of people to be influenced in that manner by a single individual, right? So who has the power and control of the love? That becomes a big deal, right? So people start seeking this power and control over love. Like, how am I gonna get control of love so I can get this effect with this person? And of course, the witch would make her money because people would want to control the love of another person, like the woman who put her blood in her fellow's soup. But you know, this is a thing that I mentioned, of course, last time. Do you guys think you can control love? How long do you think you can do it? If you can. What's the like half-life on love control? Right? And this has the whole thing with power. Like, power when forced will have an initial action. That's true. It'll go. It'll do. But how long is that going to last if it's not true, if it's not felt, right? If the United States forces a government into place in a country, how long does that usually last? Forever? Did Russia last forever? No, because they're forcing it on people. They don't love the people, right? And Russia, one of Russia's greatest sorcerers, you guys know Rasputin? So good, Rasputin. Such a good story. Speaking of love, he loses his penis in the end. I mean, that's like a whole story in and of itself. But there was a man, you guys know Rasputin, through his influence, through his love, basically was helping run the entire country of Russia through his influence of the Tsar, Nicholas. And because he had the power to stop Nicholas's son from bleeding, because his son was a hemophiliac, he would just bleed. Rasputin would walk in the room and his son would stop bleeding like that. It was the only thing that would stop his son from bleeding was if Rasputin came into the room. Crazy, right? That's some Russian stuff right there. Everybody else hated Rasputin because he had such power over everybody. He was kind of a gnarly guy. Like, he would rape nuns and like have sex with everybody and was like kind of dirty, and he had long fingernails and looked kind of crazy. You see these pictures where it's like the Russian like kind of government and everyone's dressed all, you know, like proper in their Russian suits, and then Rasputin's there, he's like an animal, like he's just like ah. And so this general asked Rasputin, he said, how is it that you, this filthy beast, have such power and influence over Russia? And he wrote his answer on a little napkin. You know what he said? He said, with love, my little turtle dove, with love. Smart sorcerer, right? And it worked until the Bolshevik Revolution. But it was through that influence of love, and he was like very virile, like even though he would rape a lot of women, he was like, everyone was on him like crazy. Like the women were just, he would look at them and that was it, game over. Like his influential power through being able to manipulate love, like took over an entire country. And he could get any woman that he wanted, just with his little like hypno eyes, you know? So when you have like that level of the ability to control love, you can do it for a while and off the get-go, but then the repercussions start to happen. And Rasputin's a pretty good, you know, example of that. So Rasputin then becomes so hated by everybody because of what he does. Like, he has an assassination attempt, right? Come on in. And he's like, well, do you guys remember? He was like poisoned and then it didn't work, and then he was stabbed and then he was still alive, and then he was shot and he still didn't die, and then they had to push him in the river and eventually they think he drowned. But so that's poisoned, stabbed, shot, and then drowned. And then he was missing his penis. So the love will work when it's forced, but then people get mad if you force love on them, right? Does it work for you guys if someone tries to force love on you? What about that guy at the bar that's all, hey, come on, do it. Does that work? No, it doesn't work. And if it does work because you're drunk, you're going to wake up in the morning and go, oh, I have to leave. So it could work temporarily, but it doesn't stick. If the love isn't true, you can't control it for any amount of time, right? And another good example of that we see in the governments, like, and this was something I mentioned last time too, that there's this thing with the powerful, and who do the powerful men exert their power on, right? It's not powerful women. They're sleeping with the maids. They're getting prostitutes. They're getting the like least powerful people in society to exert their power on, right? That's the like weird dichotomy that happens. Who did Arnold Schwarzenegger sleep with? It was his maid. It's not like Hillary Clinton. You know, they're not gonna like try to exert the power over other powerful people. It's the less powerful people. So then you get that weird octave thing of the as above, so below. So you look at how does the prostitute control through love? Well, they're sleeping with the men in the power, right? And that's why there's all these crazy stories throughout history of these prostitutes that then end up like taking over nations and stuff like that. Because they're the ones, these powerful men, end up like trying to get the love that they can't, and that goes back to the whole corruption thing, right? Their hearts are broken, so they can't get love from anybody else, so they have to go pay for it, right? So the prostitute is filling that spot of being able to provide the love that these powerful men don't have, and then they end up taking their power away, either by the scandal coming out, right? Which is pretty much how it almost always goes down. The scandal comes out, and then you see the girl with the big fake boobs, and then like that's it. It's kaput for the guy, right? It's like every time. It's ridiculous, you know? So that ability to control through love goes way back down, even in the most unassuming people that you wouldn't think have power. If they have love, if they have sex, you can get a lot of power that way, right? Even if you got no money, you got nothing else, you got that, you're in, right? Temporarily until people start to catch on, right? And then you gotta run. Gotta make a little run for it. So how are we gonna kind of like use love in a beneficial manner to try and combat these power systems, right? What are we going to do? What can we do? We want to send the whores into the countries? Should we just send the whores into Israel and the Middle East and everything? Just give them a bunch of hookers. Do it. So then we get into like that idea of like, well, what's the deal then? How do we use love in a good way to fight power, right? We know it'll work. We know Justin Bieber is a sorcerer. So we know this is true. What's the alternative to the Justin Bieber sorcerer, right? What's the antidote to that? So then we have to go into non-violence. And that's like everybody's least favorite word. Non-violence is like one of the hardest things to do. Especially when you're in love, right? How many of you can successfully, if you've had love taken away or loved somebody that's mean, just like everybody's loved somebody that's mean, right? It's the worst. I hate loving mean people. What are you going to do? You're going to kick them? Key their car? Or are you going to go Gandhi style? Can you do it? You guys do it Gandhi style? It's very hard, right? So non-violence becomes the martyr, right? Now we look at how can we martyr ourselves successfully and become like the Christian saints, like Saint Valentine. Martyrs threw themselves to the lions and then they died, right? So then you're like, okay, how does that work? What is nonviolence? If you're just going to die, what's the point? Then all the mean guys win. What's the point in throwing your heart to this mean person? They're just going to kill you. And then what happens? You know, I did a little group that I do, and we were talking about like, you know, resistance and how to fight back, but without really fighting back. And this goes all into Kung Fu and Bruce Lee and all kinds of amazing ideas. And there was, you know, a yoga girl there, and she said, if you just love them and give them light, they can't possibly resist. And I love that idea, but I mean, I've been messed up by people, you know, and I will continue to give people love, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to be mean to you, okay? Just because you love somebody doesn't mean they're not going to kill you. That's just the hard fact of life. But does that mean that you shouldn't love people? This is like where love becomes the battlefield, right? In a very serious manner. you know. And we can look at Jesus as a pretty good like starting point, and then we can go to like who are like the biggest nonviolent perpetrators that we can think of are of course Gandhi and then Martin Luther King, who learned from Gandhi. What happened to Jesus, Gandhi, and Martin Luther King? They all got killed. So gnarly. Assassination. Assassinated. Right? You guys know Gandhi was killed by an Indian? Like 30 years of fighting non-violently in India to get the British out, and who takes him out? An Indian man. It's like the worst story ever. This fellow countryman hated Gandhi so much because he was talking to the Muslims. Sorry. He was talking to Muslims in India and trying to, like, you know, have diplomatic talks. Well, there's a lot involved if you read his statements for why he murdered Gandhi. And he wrote, like, all these books for why he murdered Gandhi. But, like, a lot of it was he didn't like what he was doing with the Muslims, and then also he was trying to get rid of the caste system in India, which he felt like Gandhi wasn't doing. So this man that had fought nonviolently for his country for like decades just gets taken out by a fellow countryman. And it's like, what's the point? You know, why even bother? Well, do you guys know what Gandhi said about nonviolence? There's this really good, like, short little thing that he wrote called The Power of Nonviolence. And you can just Google it and read it. It doesn't take very long. And I'll just read this really quickly because it's really good. He says, nonviolence in its dynamic condition means conscious suffering. So you got to go into it willing to suffer. Willing sacrifice of your body to feed the babies. She-wolf style, right? It does not mean meek submission to the will of the evildoer, but it means the pitting of one's whole soul against the will of the tyrant. Okay, the pitting of your whole soul against the will of the tyrant. That's pretty epic, you know. That there's someone physically harming you, like maybe tearing your body to pieces, which happen pretty often in a lot of the martyr, you know, examples. They'll literally be rendered limb from limb. Tortured. Torture. Totally tortured. You know. Like Braveheart style, their guts taken out. You know. And they, through their consciousness, through the will of their soul, do not relent to what the tyrant is trying to get them to do, even through death. That is what courage is. We've talked about how corruption comes from the French coeur, which is heart, and then rupt is, you know, rupture, to break. So courage, the coeur is the heart, right? And the rage of not letting the heart be penetrated. That's the impenetrable heart. Right? It's like the opposite of all those dictators that died from heart attacks and heart disease, like Kim Jong-il and, you know, others that kind of went down this year. All of them heart attacks, all corruption, you know. The opposite of that is the courage, the incorruptible heart. And that really is what nonviolent action at its core is. And that was what Martin Luther King was attempting to communicate. He was like, you guys can beat the crap out of me. We see what you do to the people, but you know what? I love you anyway. I'm not going to say it's cool that you beat us up and kill us, but I'm going to love you anyway. I'm going to stand against it with everything I have, but I'm not going to kill you. And Gandhi says in this essay, he's not going to meet a sword with a sharper sword, right? Because then, where do you get? Maybe you'll defend your physical body. And he says, like a soldier, look at a soldier. You give him a bunch of guns, maybe a bazooka, you know, all this stuff. What happens when you take all that stuff away from the soldier? What has he got? Maybe he'll, like, fight you with his fists, you know? But if you have someone whose soul is completely dedicated to the love in their heart, it doesn't really matter. Like, you can strip away every inch of their flesh, and that soul and that love is intact forever. You can't take, like, the gun away, right? Because it's a state of being, right? And that's like the idea of non-violently fighting corruption and tyranny and power. Yeah, it's true. You know what? You as an individual person just might not be able to do it and live, or even like save your village or save your neighborhood or save your family. You might not do it. You might just eat shit. You might totally, you know? That happens every day around the world. You know, I know we're kind of spoiled here, but even in LA, I'm sure it's happening somewhere right now. Right now. A few places, probably, right? So, what is the point? One of the things Gandhi said is that action of standing up, that courage, infiltrates in such a long-lasting, penetrating manner that the influence extends over not just a single person, but over lifetimes, right? Lifetimes. What is like every story you guys hear? Hero stories, courage stories, fighting against tyrants. If there weren't those stories, there would be like no books, no Hollywood, no nothing. What are the stories that we remember that we want to tell our kids? There are the stories that have penetrated because somebody stood up for something that they loved, for something they believed in. And those things people see when that happens. And I know Jesus is such a good example of that. Look at Jesus' influence. Bigger than Bieber. Right? The influence of those witnesses, those martyrs that witnessed Jesus, they said, oh my God, he just totally willingly died for love, died for God. That is rad, right? And then those witnesses were like, you know what? I just saw something so cool. I don't even care. You can just kill me too. Because it was so good. You can just do it. Like, go ahead, kill me too. But you know what? Jesus' love is going to go forever. That is that idea of the penetration and longevity of true love, of real love, not controlled love or power love, right? That extends its influence over possibly an entire globe, a whole globe, right? People would see these saints and martyrs, you know, Saint Valentine, they would look and they'd go, oh my God, did you see that? They just cut that guy's head off and he said, I love you. That's crazy, right? People see that and that's like a miracle. And that courage sits in their own hearts, right? And you're like, wow, that is seriously powerful. That's power on the inside, right? When you get the power coming from the inside out, it goes way further than you trying to make someone do something. As soon as they get out of your hold, they're gone. They're out, you know? They're not going to stick around. They're not even going to talk about you. They're going to be talking about Jesus. You know? They're going to be like, yeah, this jerk was trying to make me love him, but you know what? Jesus was so great. And that's what's going to happen. So the thing about power, true power from love, comes not from winning the object of your affection, contrary to how most people participate in love. Power in love does not mean you win control of your loved one. You guys know that, right? Power in love comes from the action of loving itself. And you know what? You have to willingly be prepared to just die. I think a lot of people, they don't want to love people because there's a threat of annihilation. Because, oh my God, if I love this person, I love them so much, they could just totally kill me. Because I love them, and you could get like hurt so bad, you'll die. Heartbreak equals death. All over the place every day. You know, many people like just kill themselves because they got no love. It's like a lot, right? It's no joke. So the true power of love is being willing to just go ahead and risk that annihilation and say, you know what? I just love so much, you can go ahead and kill me because this is so rad. This love is so rad, you can kill me. I'm going to willingly suffer conscious suffering, as Gandhi said. I will consciously suffer and be willing to die because love is so rad. That is what power of love is all about. And that nonviolence that Martin Luther King, that Gandhi were talking about, it doesn't mean you're not going to die. That is not what it means. And people get so upset, they're like, well, why bother loving someone? Like, it all just turns to shit, you know? Like, we've all felt that way. Come on. Where you're like, what is the point? It's just pain and terrible, you know? Why do it? Well, you can't love for an outcome, right? Because then that's like corruption love. You're loving for an outcome, that's corruption love. You got to just love for love. And for the sake of the action of loving. And you might die. You just might die. You totally will die. Eventually. But you know what? You can die with love in your heart, or you can die with your heart broken. You can have the courage, or you can have the corruption. And we all get to make that choice. But you know what? That is a really gnarly choice to make, because you have to face fear. You have to face powerlessness and not being able to like have that control over the person you love. You have to completely let go of the idea that you have any control at all. And you just have to say, you know what? I have no control and I love you and it might kill me. That sounds great, right? But what it does not mean is that you have to tolerate abuse, right? And that is what Gandhi and Martin Luther King were trying to say. You can do that, but you do not have to tolerate the will of the tyrant. You pit your whole soul with love against the will of the tyrant. Just because you love your abusive husband who drinks and kicks the crap out of you every night, does that mean you just sit there and say, I love you? No, it does not, right? You say, I love you so much and I cannot tolerate this behavior. You don't hit them back, you just leave, right? And you might die. And there's a lot of people that do die that way. But you have to pit your whole soul against that tyrant. And there's so many microcosms that we see of that every single day, right? But as long as you do pit your soul against the tyrant in a loving manner, I mean, I don't know, you can do pretty good. And there's a lot of people that would say, you know, maybe it'll be better if we just be sneaky, right? What if we just kind of like infiltrate and pretend we're cool with the tyrant, you know? And then we can live. And we can make differences in other places, you know? But you know what happens then? I mean, look at the world. That's what happens. What happens is an entire country tolerates the tyrant, and then there's no justice. There's no repercussion. There's no action, and we live in a world full of people that just think it's cool to exert their will over each other. Because everyone's sneaky and they won't pit their whole soul against the will of the tyrant. I mean, this is like heavy duty. It's no joke. And you see what's happening all around the world right now? There's so many revolutions happening now. Like everywhere. It's getting really intense. And it's happening violently. You guys saw it happen like in Egypt, Tunisia, and Greece, and everywhere. Everyone's getting pissed and they're getting violent and they're fighting and then they're getting kickback, right? They're throwing like Molotov cocktails and stuff, and then the armies are coming back with like bigger guns, and then they're like trying to get some guns organized, and they're fighting them with the guns, right? Is that working so good? No. I don't know. We gotta like get a little more love worked in there somehow, even though it means you might die in the face of the tyrant, right? Otherwise, we'll keep having these little revolutions that don't go anywhere. The Bolshevik, look at the Bolshevik Revolution. Again, we'll go back to Russia with Rasputin, right? They take out the sorcerer, the Bolsheviks put in like their government. What happens? Russia takes over and like controls everybody. So terrible, right? The outcome of the Bolshevik Revolution, fighting against the love-controlling sorcerer, is only to exert more control over countries that don't love them at all and don't want anything to do with the Soviet Union. That is like retarded, right? It's so silly. And that's what's happening in so many different countries. They'll be, even when there's revolutions, they'll replace the thing they're fighting against with another attempt to like control through power. It's only going to keep going back and forth. Everyone's just passing around power balls everywhere they go, thinking that, you know, maybe if they have it for a little while, they can make a difference. But I think the only real answer is we just have to pit our whole souls against the tyrant, you know. And even if that's just like sitting there, you know, in our places, Gandhi says he would mentally focus on it, right? He would just think about it with his whole soul, like, you know, every day. And that was his action against it, right? That's what he would do. And then he would not eat. And you know that the meanies were probably like sitting there like, oh, he's not eating because he thinks it'll get control over us. They're like, ha, 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 ha. Foolish little man. Go ahead, don't eat, starve. And then you'll die and see what control you'll have. But you know what happened? People were like, look, he's not eating. He loves so much he doesn't even care. And it was the martyr, the witness, saw the courage, and then it spread all over India. And then those tyrants, they were like laughing so hard at this little skinny man not eating. They were like, who cares if you don't eat? Well, guess what? The amazing power of courage made the whole country kick out the British rule. Just by watching that little man not eat. That's pretty good, right? I like it. So don't underestimate that power of any action through the whole of your soul, when put in the right direction, can have power over tyrants. And that's what you guys should think about on Valentine's Day. Not trying to control someone's affection through chocolate or rose petals or stuff like that. Just pit your whole soul of love against them with no thought of the outcome. And we'll do pretty good on Valentine's Day. Right? All right. That's all I have to say.